First off, welcome everyone who's watching on Facebook. We're excited to stream for you guys. This is the first actually in-person meeting for the Louisville Small Business Summit. We've been doing it virtually since we started back in September of this last year, Brian, something like that. So we've been doing that for the last 6 months or so. We've been getting pretty solid engagement, and today we have some awesome speakers to be able to share some pretty pertinent information related to cybersecurity, which is a very important topic for small business owners in particular that don't necessarily have the same amount of resources that a large corporation may have, but still the cyber threats are very pertinent to them. So I'm going to go ahead and actually let them introduce themselves briefly, but we're excited to get started.
My name is Dean Lause. I'm with Argentum IT. I provide a managed IT portfolio to small businesses, and cybersecurity is one of the major things that we concentrate on because a lot of the smaller businesses do not implement what we would consider best security practices from that aspect. So if you're interested in security and making sure that you're not out of business in 6 months after and that is actually a proven statistic, if you are a victim of a cybersecurity breach from a small business aspect, most people in that arena are out of business in about 6 months afterwards. So that's where we concentrate, and I will let Christina introduce herself.
So I'm Christy Emerson with US Bank. I'm Vice President of Treasury Management. And basically what that means is I handle everything with the deposit accounts, specifically any of the products and services that might help a small business help prevent fraud, which is, incredibly important. It's not a problem until it is a problem, and then it's a big one. So I've been in banking for about 20 years now. This is my 20th year. So I'm happy to be in this role, being able to help small businesses after doing some things in management and lending. And I'll turn it back over to Raphael.
All right, thanks so much. Well, we're very thankful to have you guys here with us. But what we're going to go ahead and do is ask you a question related to why did you get into cybersecurity? Because it's one of those things that is not necessarily the most common thing that you see people do. So what got you into it?
Well, I've worked in corporate America for the better part of 20 years before I went to work with Argentum IT. I was Director of Network Security and Operations for North America in the last position. And from the aspect of what I want to do is basically, my background has been IT. I may have an MBA with an accounting background and everything else, but one of the biggest issues that most small businesses face is they don't have the resources of, corporate, Fortune 500 companies. They don't have the ability to stay on top of things. Like I do in respect from that is, like all the security breaches, recently, a energy company in the Northeast was compromised and they lost 4.5 million of their customers' records with personal information, social security numbers, and everything else. So that's one of the things that I'm extremely passionate about. I believe in, making sure that small business owners and the SME space in general has the same ability to protect themselves as the corporate environment does. So that's one of the reasons that I got into this. I mean, my goal is to make business owners' life is, the way that I phrase it is making IT as simple as turning on a light. So that's the reason I've got into this business and one of the reasons I stay in it and that I like it.
So cybersecurity is obviously a piece of what I do in the banking world. But what I really like about my role is I'm able to be a consultant and take a consultative approach to meeting with my clients and helping small businesses understand what you need to do to protect yourself, your business, and your finances. A lot of folks are there to protect the consumer. There are a lot of consumer protection agencies out there and people available to consult with consumers, not so much on the business side. So really privileged to be able to do that now.
I'm Brian Reed. I'm a business banker for the US Bank, and I'm really excited to have two different ways to look at fraud. So my first question is, when we look at internal fraud in a business, what are ways that a business can protect themselves both on a cyber and both on a business accounts? How can a business protect themselves for having that internal fraud?
From the, IT aspect of it, there's a lot of different things and tools that are out there. Not a lot of it is cost effective when you look at it from an individual small business aspect, but there are tools out there that will actually let you, track what your individual employees are doing. And that is, some people will say, well, that's an invasion of privacy. No, not really, because if they're doing it on your company machines, your company computers, and things like that, as a business owner, that is your privilege and your right to know what people are doing. So, yes, there's privacy issues there, but also as a business owner, that is something you need to be aware of, that it's well within your rights to monitor and track. Now, from the aspect of fraud, what you need to be aware of is that, internally, individual employees have potential access to personal information that includes social security numbers and things like that, from especially, depending on the business you're in. If you're in insurance, healthcare, and, financial areas such as banking, you have the potential to be exposed to a lot of different information that is personal in nature and can open up your business to a liability suit, especially if an individual within your purview takes that information and does stuff with it that they shouldn't, i.e. they open up new bank accounts, which is where Lisa is supposed to be monitoring. And, in most cases, she'll catch it. So, but, overall, it's using that personal information that they potentially have access to, and you need to keep that well guarded and know what's going on with it at all times. So, Christina?
So as Dean alluded to, really you need to have multiple controls in place. You need to have multiple people taking a look at what you're doing. If you have one person who is writing the checks and signing the checks, you need to have someone else who's doing the reconcilement of the bank statements. And that's something that doesn't cost you anything. It's just division of duties, making sure that the person maybe taking the deposits to the bank is not the person that records them in your QuickBooks or your accounting software.
No, that's some great advice, to put some safeguards in place to make sure that you can control how your employees are interacting within the organization. That's some awesome advice. So one of the most common ways that fraud is perpetrated is by gaining access to passwords. So I guess some of the questions I have are related to, how do you, control this, essentially limit the opportunity for people to gain access to your passwords? And then on a second note, how do you create passwords that are a little bit more harder to deal with?
Well, one of the things that I will tell you is a very bad practice, and I've seen done over and over, is keeping passwords on sticky notes, keeping them. I've dealt with clients that actually kept their passwords and usernames to websites in an Excel spreadsheet that everybody in the office had access to. And that's one of the first things that I will tell you is a no-no. First, if somebody steals that spreadsheet or emails it, hacks into your network, guess what? You just give them the keys to the kingdom, whether they're your bank accounts, it doesn't matter. You are, that's one of the biggest issues that I've seen. The best way to handle it is use a password manager. There's numerous ones out there. We supply one as part of our services, but, I'm not going to tell you which ones to use. This is, something that, one, I will give you advice if you come to me personally, but at the same time, there are numerous password tools out there to generate those random passwords, record them, and keep track of them. And on top of that, use a complex master password to gain access to those passwords, because if you can hack into it and it's the same password as some of your other ones, that's just setting you up for failure. So plain and simple.
I don't have anything to add. I think it's
Okay.
And I've been victim to that in the past, where I've had the same password for pretty much everything, because it's hard to remember those type of passwords. But those tools that are out there in order to, control those passwords are quite important. And there's a lot of free ones out there as well.
So before I got into banking, if you told me what is phishing, I would think about sitting on a boat, throwing a line out and trying to catch something. But when we think of business fraud and think of things in banking and think of things of any business, what is phishing? I mean, why is phishing so important to know about, and why is phishing can be so bad for your company?
Yeah. So, Dean, I'll let you answer sort of the broader question, and then maybe I'll give some specific examples.
So from a broad spectrum, phishing is where an individual sends an email that is impersonating either somebody within the company or somebody that you know, and they're looking for personal information, whether that be passwords, potentially instances where an owner, such as Raphael or somebody within the company says, hey, oh, so and so who's in charge of the funds, I need this money transferred to this bank account, and to cover whatever the potential cover is, whether it's gift cards for giving away as customer gifts or whatever the case may be. Those are in general, phishing is basically any attempt to gain information and or funds through an illicit email. In some cases they're very easy to spot, and in some cases they're very difficult to spot. So
Yeah, and to expand on that a little bit, some of the things that we've seen in the banking industry, unfortunately, is companies, they have an accounts payable person, an office manager who's getting emails. It's their responsibility to cut checks, to send wire transfers, to send ACHs. One of the things we see a lot is someone will pose as another company that's one of their clients or one of their vendors and say, my information just changed. Please send the information here instead of my old information. And if you're not cognizant of that, I always say, give them a phone call, check back and see who actually sent you that email. Don't just take email at face value. Likewise, you'll see a lot of times, if I'm emailing you from abccompany.org, you might get an email from abc.company.org. A lot of these folks are very good at what they do, and they may send something and say, I've got to send something immediately. I'm out of town. It's an emergency. I forgot. I need to wire these funds to so-and-so company right away. A lot of times there's a sense of urgency. A lot of times it's an email address that you might not catch right away. So just that extra step of confirmation, if it's your boss, you probably have their phone number. You can call them or text them. If it's someone else in the company, you probably have another way to walk down the hallway and ask them if that's what they really wanted you to do. So always, trust but verify.
And that's extremely common in the real estate business. I got an email a couple of months ago where my boss, quote unquote, it was like my boss's name at our company's name at something else. So if you didn't read the entire email thread, you would have thought, oh, it's my boss emailing me, when in reality it wasn't. It was just an elongated email that just so happened to be my boss's email at whatever, because they went to our company website, found the broker, and then they emailed them. So yeah, it's something to be aware of for sure. All right, so that kind of lends itself to the next question, which is related to wire fraud. And I know we were talking about this briefly offline with one of Brian's clients in the past, but can you kind of explain what wire fraud is and how to protect yourself against it? It's kind of lends itself to the previous question.
Yeah, so it really does relate a lot to the phishing information, but unfortunately, a lot of times non-customers will get information from a company website, or they'll find out, it's very easy to find out who the owner or controller or office manager of a company is, and contact someone and say, I need you to wire this money. And again, it's all about that sense of urgency. They create that urgency and that need that you've got to get something done immediately, or you're going to be in trouble, or you're not going to meet a deadline. So typically they'll either call you. Sometimes they'll call the bank. In that case, that's great because we're going to call you and verify. But oftentimes you'll have folks, again, either call you and say, I need you to do this. I need you to wire these funds immediately. Or they'll pose as one of your vendors or one of your clients and tell you, my information just changed today. I have a closing today. I have whatever the case may be. and I need you to send it to this new information immediately. And there's no time for you to verify it. I just need you to send it.
So Dean, I got a pretty direct question for you. So as a company, as a business owner, how do I know if my software is up to date? How do I know I have the right protection? Because as we know, new software means a better criminal every day. We think about how we're going to beat it every day, and it continues in everything that we do. So as a business owner looking at their cybersecurity, what would you say they need to look at, or how would they, should they, continually to update and, adjust to the world around them?
Brian, part of that is a lot of, I want to say 90% of it from a wire fraud aspect is user education. The person receiving the email really needs to pay attention, because if they don't, as Christine said, they can transfer money, with new information. And one of my clients actually did, one of their accounting person did wire transfer $20 some thousand to a bank account that was not, intended, just because, she was taught by her boss not to question emails that she receives from him. The email address said X, the person's name, but the address didn't match. And in her, in her defense, I mean, she was wire transferring money as she was instructed, because she was taught not to question her boss. That is a very, very poor way to manage your environment. As Christine said, trust but verify, because otherwise you can be out of money. His response was, well, insurance will cover it. No, insurance will not cover that, because it was a negligent act. So from that aspect, you have to educate your employees. You have to keep them up to date. We can make sure that all the patches and everything else are current on machines, but in some cases, those emails that, you're getting may originate from a hacked account, but chances are they're not going to originate from a hacked account. They're going to be originated from a spoofed account with a spoofed name and an entirely different email address. So it's making sure that your employees know what to look for.
And and that's a very good answer. What I'm saying is, what, not just wire fraud, but fraud in general, what steps should a business owner take as far as cybersecurity? And I will add that to with Christy, is what steps on the banking side should you take to protect yourself if you're concerned about that? Meaning writing checks, credit cards, information that could be held liable to the company itself. I'll let either one of you go first.
Expand.
So when it comes to writing checks and wire transfers and stuff like that, I mean, there's typically, standards out there. PCI, which is Payment Card Industry Standards for security, from if you're using a credit card terminal within your business, there are some boundaries and things that you need to do to certify that you have those devices segregated and nobody has access to the stuff. Most of the stuff that's handheld is already PCI compliant, but if you're using it within specific software such as QuickBooks and things like that, there are things that you need to do to certify that, hey, my machines are up to date, my patches are current, my security software is up to date. And, relying on strictly, hey, it's installed is not a good option. You need to verify. It's like anything else. Verify that the patches are up to date. Verify that the AV is up to date. And those are things that we watch as a, IT provider. We watch that stuff and make sure that you're current. So, if you're sitting out there saying with everything on autopilot, saying it's backed up, saying it's, all my security is up to date, chances are you're not. So from that aspect, that's one way to help cover yourself, and making sure that your AV is up to date, making sure that your patches are up to date. And there's a lot of other things underneath the covers that are not necessarily automated that we can do to help cover that. Now, from the banking side, I'll let Christine cover that.
Yeah, so with PCI compliance, if you accept credit cards, to Dean's point, you need to be PCI compliant. Most credit card terminals are at this point. You can't have the full account number. You can't keep personal information. But pay attention to that survey that you have to do annually. And notice some of the things that they ask you. They're basically going to ask you, do you keep credit card information taped under your desk or under your keyboard? The answer should be no, but really think about that. Do we actually do that? If someone calls over the phone and takes payment information, are we writing that down and then destroying it, or are we saving it? You know, and check with your IT professional. Find out what safeguards they can put into place for you, or software that they might recommend. When it comes to other things with your bank account, it's not one size fits all for every business. So I highly recommend sitting down, talking with your banker, talk about how you're accepting money into your account and how you're sending money. And a lot of times people will say, well, you know, I'm just accepting money and I'm giving them my account number to deposit into, so that's not a problem. But it is a problem because you're giving out your account information. And there are a couple ways that you can protect that. You know, one of them is a UPIC number, which is basically, in layman's terms, a ghost account number that you can provide. The other thing that, you know, doesn't cost you anything, set up an additional account number for those ACHs to come into. Look at maybe some blocks and filters, which I won't go into all the detail, but basically that's just saying I'm only going to allow certain things to come into this account and I'm not going to allow anything to be taken out of that account. So those are things that, again, you can talk to your banker and find out. If you're writing a lot of checks, you might want to consider some other electronic payment options. You might want to send ACHs as opposed to writing checks. Because if you think about it, if you're mailing checks, if you're handing out checks, you're giving out your account and your routing number. You know, a lot of times people will say, well, I know exactly where it's going and I know that company's not going to do anything with it. The problem becomes when someone takes that out of the mailbox, when someone picks it up from someone else's desk. And unfortunately, that does happen. So you want to protect your information as much as possible. You want to not give out your checking account information as much as you can. And depending on your situation, to Brian's point, it may make sense to utilize a credit card as opposed to a debit card. I hear a lot of folks who will say, well, I make all my purchases from my debit card out of my checking account. That's a direct line to your checking account. So definitely consider other alternatives to that. And don't freely give out your account number if you don't have to.
Yeah, that's some great advice. And I'm just for my business as well. I've recently converted to using a credit card because of that exact reason, where you have direct access to my checking account. If I use a debit card and somehow you're able to gain access to it, it's definitely a worthwhile pursuit if that's something you are concerned about. So what are some of the top safety tips related to credit card processing? Because I know, just as an example, back in, you know, when I was back in 2012, when I was in college, I remember my credit card actually, I went to a restaurant and I paid for my meal, and then somehow they got my credit card information. They started making a bunch of purchases all over the place. So are there ways to protect against that particular aspect? I'm assuming the credit card processing machines maybe have evolved over time, but I thought I'd kind of ask that question.
Definitely. I mean, from my perspective, you know, I can see, you know, very easily, if you leave and give somebody your card, you don't have that card in your control. The answer is yes, people can use it. They can copy the information down. It's a little more difficult now than what it used to be, especially since you no longer have, you know, some of the, you know, they require this, you know, card validation numbers on the back and the zip codes and stuff like that. Now, with the advent of the chips on most of the credit cards, that has prevented it even a little bit further. But, you know, from the reality, from my aspect and what I do, you know, those are things that make my job a little bit easier. Now, from Christine's perspective, you know, she can add more to that. But, you know, from my side, you know, using a valid PCI compliant terminal and software makes those, you know, things a lot easier from an IT aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. From a business perspective, you want to make sure that you are following all the compliance rules that you need to. From just a personal perspective with your own cards, you know, do be cautious where you're using it. Bad people are always going to do bad things. It's sort of that, you know, you lock your house just to keep the people out of it that would walk by and walk in if it was unlocked. Same thing with your credit card or debit card. You know, don't authorize a lot of people to use it. Don't authorize other people in your family. Don't authorize, you know, a significant other, those type of things. But The biggest thing I would say is monitor your accounts, pay attention, whether you're a business owner or whether you're a consumer, pay attention to what's going on, because the minute you see an unauthorized charge, you need to contact the bank and make sure that that's taken care of. And either the bank or Visa, MasterCard, depending on the company that's provided your credit card, can help get you those funds back so that you're made whole again.
One thing I would add to that is whether you're a consumer or a business, cash is king. Your money is there. You're going to be fraud protected, meaning if it is fraud, you are going to get your money back. But let me ask you a question. Would you rather have $5,000 of your credit on hold, or would you rather have $5,000 of your liquid cash on hold? Because they are going to research it and check it. Are you protected? Yes. But it's a lot less damaging or reassuring to know it's my credit of $5,000 on hold than $5,000 of my cash gone at the time. So with that, in the world we live in, what the heck is social engineering? I have no idea. I really don't. So I don't care which one of y'all want to enter. What is social engineering? I mean, come on, tell me. So who wants to answer this? I got a feeling Dean wants this one.
I'm sure Kristen, But social engineering, in a technical term, is basically where I am calling up an individual, or I am trying to make contact with an individual in an organization to gain access to information that would give me access to, one, your account or others' accounts in your organization. It can be very difficult. There's a lot of people out there, I've heard, hey, Microsoft called me and said, I've got this problem with my PC. That is a form of social engineering. If you go by a website and you get a notification that says, oh, your machine is infected, please call this number at 1-888. And that is another form of phishing, because guess what? They're trying to bait you into calling, and then they're going to get your credit card number to, hey, well, we need your credit card number in order to fix your machine. Sorry, folks, that is a typical social engineering / phishing malware type situation where they're trying to get access to your physical machine. 9 times out of 10, you're not infected. Close it, talk to somebody that knows what they're doing from an IT aspect. And, I've had a customer call in that they hit a website, last week, and they said, well, our machine has a virus on it. No, it was a notification that popped up because they drove by. They, were on a website, probably inadvertently, that basically threw a notification out there, and they clicked on allow and basically, gave them that website permission to show notifications. If you get pop-ups on Web, Chrome, Edge, whatever the browser you're using, Firefox, they're saying, hey, let me send you notifications. Immediately click deny. Don't allow it, because that's one of the first things that they use to get in and basically start prompting you for information that you don't want to give out.
Yeah, I would say, outside of folks that I see just clicking immediately on things to get to the next page, that's one thing I see a lot. The other thing I would say is just make sure that your frontline folks are aware that they shouldn't allow access to anything. You may have someone who comes and shreds things for you. You might have someone who comes and does your trash pickup. You might have someone who comes and, services a machine for you. Make sure that that's who they are and they're with the company that they say they are. Certainly there have been times that I've seen where someone has come in to a business, they've talked to someone at the front desk who was maybe newer, maybe part-time, didn't know, and they just come in, they found the owner of the business on the internet and said, oh, hey, Joe told me to come by and check this. And they immediately give them access to their server room, or they give them access to files in the back office, and just assume that they're doing a good thing. So, people can be very good at pretending to be someone that they're not, and gain access to that information very quickly without you realizing it.
So what I just heard there is I didn't have an uncle die in Europe that left me a bunch of money, and my car warranty is not getting extended, and I did not win the Canadian lottery. So I'm a little depressed right now. You got another question?
for sure. And there's actually companies out there that will pay people to try to hack into their, or at least gain access into their facilities. In particular, when you're talking about high security environments, I mean, that's something that's big money for people who can actually gain access and grab that information. So great advice. So now that we understand a little bit about some of the threats out there and some of the remedies related to, cybersecurity threats, what are some of the best resources that business owners can use to educate themselves further if they're interested?
Well, one of the probably better websites, I mean, it's somewhat technical from the business owner's aspect. But it's a government sponsored website. They basically publish standards from a IT security standpoint, is NIST.org. It is a government funded independent third party that basically helps publish security standards and, what is considered to be, vulnerabilities. Like most recently, Dell had a update driver that was announced that had issues with allowing basically privileged level executive access to Windows operating systems, and that driver, is basically installed on millions of machines, and it needs updates. I mean, that stuff's going to be brought to your attention on those websites, along with the criticality of that particular security risk and how quickly it needs to be patched. There are, honestly, tons of different ways of getting information, but that is somewhat of a consolidated source when it comes to looking for current vulnerabilities. They also publish, minimum standards that most businesses should be adhering to, whether you're small, big, in between. Because if you're not adhering to them, you're a prime target, for getting hacked. And that's one of the big things from a small business owner's aspect. There's a lot of people that have the mindset that they are not a target. The reality of it is you are a prime target because you typically don't have the same level of security as a corporate environment. And from a ROI aspect, which most business owners understand, they get more bang for their buck by targeting smaller businesses than they do corporate environments. So, from that aspect, if you are dealing with an IT provider, they should be helping you keep up to speed on the stuff. And if not, one, look at NIST and consider looking for an IT organization to help you support that environment.
Yeah, and I would say, there are a number of things that you can look at online, but certainly, you want to reach out to a banker that you trust, talk to an IT professional that you trust, have a security policy in place, make sure that you have procedures and policies for your company. There are a lot of times that, I'll be talking with a company and say, hey, do you have these things in place? What do you do in the case of fraud? What do you do in the case of this, that, or the other? And many times the answer is, oh, I don't really have one of those. And I get it. I mean, oftentimes it's me and another person starting a business, and, we're just trying to make money. We're trying to do what we do best, right? But there are some other things that you really need to have in place to help make sure that you protect that money.
It looks like we're coming up on 8 o'clock. So real quick, if people have additional questions and they want to get in contact with you guys, how can they get in contact with you, and what's the best way just to get more information from you guys?
So I can be reached via email is probably the best way, at christine.emerson@usbank.com. And that's Christine with a CH .emerson, EMERSON @usbank.com.
And email for myself is probably the best way as well. And my personal email is dean.lause, LAUSE, @Argentum IT, which is ARGENTUMIT.com. Or you can send an email to info@argentumit.com as well, which, if you do that, it's guaranteed to be seen. I get a lot of email, so it's difficult for me to keep up with it, as these guys will attest to. But, either way, I will, catch it and get back to you. It'll be quicker if you send it to info, though. So.
And for those of you guys who are watching on YouTube, we'll be including that in the show descriptions as well, so you guys can gain access to that as well. So, all right. So that's all the questions we really have. We really appreciate your time. We really appreciate you coming by and sharing that information. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, feel free to like and subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate all the support. And again, we'll see you guys next time.